Today we're going to start using our calculators on a regular basis. And one thing I always like to do before we really get into problems is have a brief calculator lesson. I know that sounds sort of silly because most kids I know are thinking, I know how to use my calculator. I really don't need you to show me that, but I will tell you that the first test is most often failed simply because students use the calculator incorrectly. They will set the problem up right, and in your mind, you know what you want to happen, but if you don't put it in the calculator in a very specific way, you will get the wrong answer. So we're going to practice really using that exponent button today. And when we talked about what kind of calculator you need for the class, we talked about a scientific calculator. You need the log function as well. We're not worried about that today. But what we're focused on is that button. And on most of your calculators, if you have this calculator, your exponent is right here. Do you see that double E? So on my calculator, that's my exponent button. And it's a second function. So when I use that, I'm going to have to press my second function and then this. And what I've taught myself to do is when I press these two buttons, watch what I do. I say times 10. I say two words, times 10, and I touch two buttons when I say it. You're going to see why. So again, I say times 10, and that little E pops up. We're going to come back to that in a minute. Raise your hand if you have a calculator like this. Okay, this is what I most commonly see students have. If you have a graphing calculator, this is just another example, and I may not cover them all, but if you have a graphing calculator, your exponent function is right here, again, a double E, and for you, it's also a second function, so when you get to the times 10 part of your exponent, just train yourself to say times 10, okay? And here is one more example. This is I don't even know where this calculator came from, but it's an old one that I had. And on this calculator, this is the exponent button. It says EXP. It's not a second function. It's just that button. So when you touch that, you would say times 10. How many of you have this as a second function on your calculator? Raise your hand. So you'll be touching two buttons. So you want to train yourself to touch the first one and say times, the second button and say 10. How many of you have the exponent function as just a regular button on your calculator and you're only going to have to touch it once? When you touch it, you say times 10. Now, before we go any further, is there anyone who does not see the exponent button on their calculator? If you don't, raise your hand. I'm going to pause the video and come visit you for a second. We're going to make sure we know exactly where it is. Okay, so let me pause for a minute. Okay, we've located, everyone's located that function on their calculator called the magic button. So we're going to practice putting a number in. We're going to put in 6.02 times 10 to the 23rd. This is Avogadro's number. This is the amount of 1 mole of a substance, and we will use this thousands of times in this class. No one wants to punch that number in standard notation. So scientific notation is a wonderful thing. Now, when you punch this in your calculator, you are literally, I'm really going to break this down. You're going to hit the 6, the point, the O, and the 2. So everybody punch that in, but don't go any further. Now, for this times 10, you are going to hit your exponent function, whether it's just EE, EXP. If it's a second function, hit second function and that number. Okay, now I'm going to get that far on my calculator and show you what that looks like on mine. 6.02. Now mine's a second function, so I say times 10, and for my calculator, a little E pops up. That stands for times 10. Some of you might have a calculator that actually shows a little times 10. Does anybody do that? Some of you might have a calculator that instead of an E, you get two little zeros up here. Some of you may have a calculator that gives you a space and two zeros. There's all kinds of ways you're going to see this. After you hit your exponent button, whatever your exponent is, you literally just type it in, 2, 3. So that's what it looks like on my calculator, and that stands for 6.02 times 10 to the 23rd. Now, we're not going to do anything else with that. We just wanted to practice at this point putting that in our calculator. And again, depending on the calculator you've got, that could look very different. Before I go any further, and we actually practice some calculations because then you'll know if you have it right, there are a couple buttons that I do not ever want you to touch on your calculator in this class. And the first one is the caret key. Your fingers should not come in contact with that button in this class. You're not going to need it. Don't touch it. Also, when you see that times 10, do not ever touch times and do not ever put in the number 10. Do not ever do that. Another button for this function that you should never touch is x to the 2 or sometimes 10 to the x. Those are often very tempting for students. 10 to the x is not the same thing as times 10. Now, every so often, I don't see it much, but I will see a calculator that has times 10 to the x. That button is actually okay. That is your exponent button. I don't see that one much, but I do see it occasionally. So, again, the buttons that are okay, little e, big E, all these are just your exponent. EXP, capital EXP. Y'all see when we have to have a calculator lesson now. And this one, these are typically the ones that most calculators are going to have. Just make sure that the no-nos, do not touch those. Now what we're going to do is we're actually going to put some numbers into our calculator, and then when you get the right answer, you'll know you're doing it correctly. So we want to punch in. Everybody clear your calculators out. Let's put in 6.02 EE, or times 10. I'll say EE to myself sometimes. Y'all notice I say times 10 to the 23rd. Now it is okay to touch the multiplication key because I'm multiplying that whole exponent by something else. So I'm going to hit times 1,000 equals. And you should get 6.02. Now, see how my calculator gives that answer? Whoops. It's got an itty bitty times 10 and then the 26. Some of you will just have a space and a 26. Some of you will have a space and two little zeros up high and a 26. It's going to look different on different calculators. So the answer is 6.02 times 10 to the 26th. Who got that? Okay. Let's do another one. Clear your calculators out. It is essential that you are very comfortable putting these numbers in because you will do this every single day of your chemistry life, okay? And knowing how to do it is going to make your life easier. So let's put in 3.50. Trying to get it where we can see it here. Times 10 to the 8th. Now hit times 4.0 EE3. You'll often hear me say EE just as a reminder, don't hit times 10. So I've put it in. And I'm going to hit equals, and I get 1.4 times 10 to the 12. You can see that right here. And that, if you can't see that, it says times 10. 1.4 times 10 to the 12th. Now, right now, I'm not worried about rounding so much. So if you put 1.40 times 10, oh, not negative, sorry, times 10 to the 12th, that is fine. My calculator gave me 1.4, and right now we're just really wanting to make sure we can get those exponents in correctly. I literally, in 22 years of teaching, have been through probably 15 of these calculators because I use this button so much. I have all these calculators where this button has fallen off. So you're going to use it a lot. Okay, now let's try an addition problem. So we're going to put in 4.5 EE5 plus 3.2 EE6 equals, now this time my calculator gave this to me in standard notation. That's not really a problem because I'm just going to put it in scientific notation. If you write it out as 3,650,000 today, that's okay. But I think it's probably better practice to put that in scientific notation. So if I do that, it's going to be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 3.65 times 10 to the 6th. And you can actually change your calculator settings to give you your answers in scientific notation. You can set your calculator to a certain number of decimal points. For me personally, I don't like that setting. I just deal with whatever the calculator gives me because there will be some times that I don't want something in scientific notation and I would rather just get it in standard and convert it. Okay, before we move on, are there any questions on how to put exponents into your calculator? Okay, now we're going to take a look at how we would apply this practice to factor label problems. And you've already had some insight on this because we've had it on some warm-ups. So the whole point of factor label is to have that long line and that short line. And then we have a line of numbers across the top and we have a line of numbers across the bottom. This one's not very long. And the way we solve a factor label problem is this. We multiply everything on the top together. So in this case, it's just 1.5 times 10 to the 13. Don't worry about units. I'm calling this an intermediate step. This is like scratch work. We're going to divide that by the product of everything on the bottom. 1 times 1,000 is 1,000. And then we're just going to divide those two numbers. So 1.5 times 10 to the 13 divided by 1,000 equals 1.5 times 10 to the 10th. Now, these millimeters canceled. I'm left with meter on top, and so that is my unit. You really want to learn to work the units in these problems. Now, as you get more comfortable with this, for a problem like this, you are not going to have to write this intermediate step. There are some students who always want to do it because that's what they are more comfortable with, and that's okay. But I think most of you see that's just really going to be this divided by this, right? So as you get more comfortable with it for this problem, you would probably leave this out. As they get longer, it's really good practice to write that intermediate step. And that way, when you're checking homework, sometimes it's easier to pinpoint issues without having to go back and redo a lot of work. Let's look at the next one. We're going to multiply everything on the top together. So let's put in 0.075 times 1,000 times 1.0 EE6, which is actually just a million, equals Now, my calculator gave me the whole thing. It has given me, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 75 million. I'm going to write that in scientific notation. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 7.5 times 10 to the 7. I just did a decimal place. Again, we're not super worried about that today. What's this going to be? 1 times 1 times 1. 1. So really, do you have to write an intermediate step on this one? No, but because these are your notes, and you may look back at them one day, maybe in college, and ask yourself, how did I get that exactly? You can clearly see what you did here. So for your notes, I think it's good to write it down. So our answer is just 7.5 times 10 to the 7th. And what unit do you think I'm going to be using? Does anybody know what that little symbol is? Micrograms. You're going to learn that in just a few minutes. Hopefully you have reviewed the metric system sheet that I gave you on the first day of school. I told you to make sure you knew all those units because that's what we're using today. So hopefully you guys have done that and you're ready to go. I'll briefly mention them again. All right, are there any questions on how to use your calculator? Okay. I don't think I had anything on the back. Oh, I actually did. I tell you what, in the interest of time, there are some practice ones on the back. I'm not going to do these if everybody is comfortable with this because we're going to continue to practice this today. Okay.